Katie Hannon reporting in on Taoiseach joins us now. Thank you for coming in. If you look back at the 2 years, what do you think is your most significant single achievement?
Well, I think, the fact that we're bringing order back into public finances and stabilising the deficit, but being very vigilant and not complacent about the further work that has to be done. But I think that those policy positions are being vindicated. Obviously, we're in uncertain times. We've faced a huge magnitude of problems. But I think the fact we've shown a political capacity to make the big calls, make the right judgments, I think is probably what I'm most proud of.
You said stabilising, not yet stabilised the economy?
Well, I think stabilising the deficit, as I've said, and now we have a job to do with the European Commission's agreement about reducing the deficit. So that job will continue. But I think that people are hopefully starting to see that the impact of what we've had to do, and they've been very difficult and unpalatable decisions, obviously not popular with people in the immediate term against the background of, success in the past. I think, people have seen their standards of living reduce. We've seen unemployment rise. But we've also now seen that we should get into a period of growth in the second half of this year and going on to next year. The European Commission was saying this week 3% growth for Ireland, which would be double the European average. So, these have been very difficult adjustments, Richard. They've impacted on people's lives very significantly, but we've shown the political capacity to make those decisions.
But you haven't yet made any dent on unemployment. 433,000 people and another 100,000 emigrated.
Yeah, well, we have 280,000 people who are out of work for 5 days of the week. There are 70,000 people who are on short-term work, part-time work, who are on the register as well, obviously. And there are 70,000 people applying at the moment, 20,000 of whom are on supplementary welfare allowance. I mean, if you look at the quarterly household survey, 1,883,000 were working in this country at the end of last year. We've lost 166,000 jobs last year. So, sure. One recognises the difficulty, but where in an open economy there's a recession and there's a depletion or a less demand for our goods and services, clearly it has affected our employment. But we are in a better position now than we were in the 80s or in previous recessions because we're far more at work.
Where's the jobs policy, though?
Well, the jobs policy is based on three fundamental pillars. We have to bring order to our public finances. You can't maintain jobs or create jobs in the context of where there's no confidence in where the country's going as an economy. Secondly, we have to fix the banking system. We're in the process of doing that, and Brian Lennon is awaiting detailed plans from the banks to provide sector by sector increased credit for small and medium-sized enterprises, particularly because multinationals are continuing to be profitable and doing well. And also the third thing, of course, that we have to do is increase the competitiveness of the economy. What does that mean? It means we have to price ourselves back into the marketplace, having priced ourselves out of it.
Some people see that as meaning to drive down wages, that's what you're at.
Well, it's not. I mean, unit labour costs have reduced in this country last year by 4%. Between this year and next year, it will be a further reduction of 8%. In the European Union, it will increase by 1.5%, in the UK by 1.7%. So what we're doing there is pricing ourselves back into the market. If we want to create jobs and maintain jobs, we have to make sure we produce goods and services in a far more competitive trading environment now at the right price and in the right way.
As you said, there's a lot of anger out there, and that's reflected in the opinion polls. We can come back to that. But it was perhaps best vocalised by the GRA recently at their conference in a speech that was to be delivered in the presence of the Justice Minister, Dermot Ahern, but he didn't turn up. Were you taken aback at the ferocity of the attack on your government by the GRA?
Well, given the Gardaí are involved, who are, of course, a well-respected group and for whom I have the height of respect, I don't believe that was representative of the view of the wider members of the Gardaí. Certainly some of the things that were said were totally inappropriate and I think would be regarded as such.
Mr. O'Boy's got a standing ovation.
Well, we know what happens at conferences, whether they're political or GRAs or anything else.
But the accusation was treachery. The accusation was that you hadn't moved against the Anglos and the Nationwide because it was part of a cosy cartel.
Yeah, well, I mean,
how do you answer that?
Well, it's a narrative that is put out there in an attempt to suggest that that's the truth, and of course nothing could be further from the truth. Everyone is equal and amenable before the law. We support the Gardaí and the other investigatory authorities that are looking into all of those issues. We've ensured that there's a banking inquiry and a scoping exercise at the moment about all of that, and that's where it should be handled in an independent and objective way. And the political charge, I mean, we have a very charged political atmosphere, a very hostile atmosphere, which is understandable, or not understandable, but which is predictable in the context of the opportunism that it presents.
But this was unprecedented, Taoiseach, wasn't it? When the police force of the Irish Republic accuses the government of treachery.
A prominent member of the association.
Backed by the rank and file of the GRA.
It's not, in my opinion, not at all. And I think that it was simply inappropriate. It was it was entering politics. It was crossing a line that the Gardaí, I'm sure, in its broad membership would not agree with.
Well, Eamon Gilmore said something similar, didn't he?
Well, I answered Eamon Gilmore, and I totally refute it, of course. I mean, it's not correct, and in my opinion, it's simply a political charge that I've answered, and I wouldn't.
Well, can we talk
give it
about
much credence.
Can we talk about Anglo-Irish? Are you thinking or discussing shutting it down in an orderly fashion, or do we just keep pumping money in?
Well, Brian Lennon, the Minister of Finance, has outlined that the European Commission, presently there are plans going into the European Commission which will decide what is the best thing to do. We've been making it clear how do we protect the taxpayer in the aftermath of what's happened there is what our concern is, and no other concern. And what we have to try and do is make sure that, you know, people are suggesting, was in your clip there about the idea that they should have been excluded from the guarantee. I think history will prove that we made the right call on that. I mean, on balance, people could make various arguments about it, but there's no doubt, and it's since been confirmed by the new financial regulator and others, indeed the central bank governor, I think, has also confirmed it, that there was no option available to government, and we couldn't contemplate or run the banks. And the position of the Labour Party is that they wouldn't have given that guarantee.
But for how long?
It would have meant a meltdown.
Is there a point beyond which you will not go in terms of putting more money into it to keep it open? Are you even considering the orderly wind down? But
the purpose of it is not simply for the purpose of keeping it. It's how do we protect the taxpayer against the exposure that now exists.
And you can't protect the taxpayer and wind it down in an orderly fashion?
As Brian Lennon has said, all those options will be looked at in the context of discussions that are ongoing with the European Commission.
Will be looked at. Are you not looking at them right now?
Well, the management and board are also looking at the prospect of seeing, obviously, are there areas of that activity in that bank that can continue on by making sure that we reduce exposure to the taxpayer. Those are the issues.
But when somebody like Sean Fleming from your own party comes out and says it's a dead duck.
Yeah, well, Sean had a view on that, which is, you know,
shared by a lot of people.
Well, the government have made our position clear. It's about protecting the exposure of the taxpayer. And the idea that it could be simply closed up and wound down by some of the opposition proposals would have meant a 70 billion exposure for the Irish taxpayer. That can't be contemplated.
So you're ruling it out for the moment, but you're saying that you might consider it in the near future?
We're simply saying that, as Brian then has said in the Dáil, Richard, without making an argument about it, Brian has made it clear that we look at the options. Whatever is the best option for the taxpayer is what will happen there.
Why was Irish Nationwide taken into the guarantee scheme?
Well, again, the whole purpose there was, in fact, to protect the Irish taxpayer. We had a situation where if all of the indications were that if we didn't take certain steps, there was a prospect of a meltdown in the Irish economy. I mean, that was how difficult the situation was. And we made those decisions, I can assure you, from the best possible interests of the country as we saw them.
If you knew 2 years ago what you know now, would you have taken on the job as Taoiseach?
Well, absolutely. It's a great privilege to be in a position to do this job, and of course it's decided by others, who is the Taoiseach. The Dáil obviously decides that. And the job you have is, regardless of, you know, what the level of difficulty is, you know, we see in other countries where if decisions are deferred or not taken, you can lose actual control of events. You can lose the control that you need to retain for a government to make the choices, however difficult they are. And I believe that international credibility for what we've been doing needs to be mirrored at home now by a greater sense of domestic confidence that we have the capacity to come through, and I want to give that hope and opportunity to people tonight.
But it's been suggested that you did know a lot of what you know now that you knew then, because as Finance Minister between 2004 and 2008, you should have known, or could have known, a lot of what was going on within Anglo-Irish and Irish Nationwide, and indeed what was going on in the property business, but you failed to act.
No, I don't accept that we failed to act. I mean, as I say, there's a forum for all of this, and this has been discussed in this studio and elsewhere for the past 2 years, and there will be an objective and independent assessment of all that. But it is not true to say that government at the time was indifferent. First of all, the situation is no one foresaw the international financial crisis that we now have, but I don't want to go into all of that.
And the important point
on the property issue, my first job as Minister of Finance was to do a review of all the property-based tax incentives. In December of 2006, before this crisis ever arose, I abolished them in respect of all new projects. I also refused to listen to the clamour that there was in 2006 and 2007 about reducing or abolishing stamp duty, which would have fed more into the property price. We had seen property prices starting to abate after the end of 2006, and then we ended up with this other situation that added to the vulnerability of the Irish economy.
What was the Department of Finance saying to you at the time about the banks and their reckless lending?
Well, as you know, from 2003 we had introduced the Central Bank and Financial Services Authority Bill, which was basically about, the Central Bank Authority Bill, which was basically about giving independence, statutory independence to the regulatory authorities. I don't believe there should be political interference in respect of individual regulatory decisions, similar to what we've seen in relation to Quinn Insurance, for example. I don't think anyone would be suggesting. In fact, there was a lot of cause to ensure that there wasn't a political
Well, not interference, but you have to know what they're doing, and if they're not doing their job, you have to act.
Yes,
surely. That's not political interference. That's merely regulating the regulator.
Yeah, but clearly the regulatory system in Ireland, as in other countries, has proven to be mistaken, wasn't correct. And didn't in fact work. So I mean, those regulatory systems were in place on the basis of us having a competitive financial services industry that was providing well-remunerated jobs.
If you even looked at the balance sheets of Anglo-Irish or Irish Nationwide, you would know surely that something was going on there that mightn't necessarily be right, and that on further investigation could prove to be.
Well, if you look at the financial stability reports of the central bank and indeed of the regulator, you'll see that while there are vulnerabilities spoken about in relation to the economy generally, there wasn't any suggestion, nor was there any call from those authorities or indeed from the opposition that there was undercapitalisation in the Irish banking system at that stage.
So there was no alarm bells going off in the Department of Finance at any time in your tenure, between 2004 and 2008?
Well, obviously from autumn 2007, when international credit system started to become more difficult because of the fact that the subprime market problem in the US was starting to take hold. That was the whole issue there, was trying to manage and ensure that we had a proper access to sufficient credit in this country, the same as elsewhere.
And the fact that Irish Nationwide, which was a building society supposedly to help people buy houses, was acting essentially as a property investor and coming in involved in partnership deals with developers, that didn't set off alarm bells anywhere.
But again, there was, I want to make it clear that the practices that are now emanating in terms of the governance of these institutions, both in terms of the board of directors and elsewhere, is now a matter of independent, objective assessment and investigation, and all of that will be dealt with in that forum. There's no point in, I don't want to say anything that prejudices in any way both the investigations that are ongoing or any investigations that are to come.
The backlash from the public we saw in last Sunday's Business Post in the Red Sea poll, the Fianna Fáil down into third position behind Fine Gael and Labour. When you read numbers like that, 23%, do you even think of resigning?
No, my job is to continue with the work that we're doing. We're halfway through our term, a little more than halfway. And look, the job that we've had to do in the last 2 years, it doesn't surprise anyone who'd have any degree of political knowledge that it doesn't exactly win you popularity in the popularity stakes, but these are necessary decisions which you have to take, which are working and which we must persevere with. And what we've got to do is show and continue to try to convey and communicate to the people, perhaps more successfully than we've been doing up to now, or certainly I've been able to do, to say to the people, these are necessary decisions, these are in our interests, whilst there are short-term impacts and adjustments and loss of standards of living that we've endured as a result of this. If we don't take some steps back now and get our affairs in order, we could end up with our backs to the wall completely, and no one would say that that was a government that discharged its duty. We have a duty to discharge, and I think we have to continue doing the right thing by the country for the longer term.
There is, though, this concern about the Croke Park deal, that it's going to go south, that it's going to be lost, and that despite today's clarifications, that such is the anger and such is the distrust following the failure or the breakdown of talks at the end of last year, that it will be rejected.
No, I think that there's a lot of serious reflection taking place. I understand as having negotiated the deal, and I think it's the best deal that can be negotiated in the present circumstances. I understand where people might have a worry or a concern, but let's be clear about it. It does provide income security to people. It does provide job security to people. But most importantly, in terms of the reforms that we need to undertake, and everyone accepts need to be undertaken in the interest of the taxpayer who's paying for all of this and providing the best possible services, we're not talking about imposed solutions here. We're talking about working on a common agenda that has been discussed in great detail, both in the Croke Park deal and indeed with government during the course of 2008. And I think people recognise, looking elsewhere at the present time, the need for stability and the need for us to work together. We can come through this crisis, and we are doing so. I think we should work together on that basis.
To leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for coming in tonight.